Hey everyone, Margarita here. This is part 2 of the 2021 Ford gasoline spill in Flat Rock, Michigan that was not contained as they stated on the news, and as they stated on the news also that nobody was injured during any of this. Here my son and I were fighting for our lives, running for our lives, hopping from hotel to hotel, trying to save our lives after all the treatments we had already paid for, been through. We barely kept ourselves alive those last several years, and now here we are on the run for our lives while Ford is lying to everybody about where this gas is contained at. At no time was it ever contained. All they did was flush it from city to city and in the waterways, and then here I was trying to outrun it and stay in the clearest spot possible, because nowhere was clear, and except for that one hotel I finally found, the last one I was at the last few weeks of this, down all the way down in Holland, Ohio. That was the clearest, that was the only one that was clear, that the gas particles did not reach. So during all this, here they are trying to demand medical documents from me that I could not produce. And that's due to my mother's delusional phone calls, her ongoing crimes, inserting herself in situations. She had called everybody at the city, called to the top of Ford. She talked to some Christine lady at the top of Ford. I do not remember her last name. I was living in extreme chaos, on the run for my life, unable to catch anything on film. It was so chaotic. It was so urgent. We were so close to death, in and out of consciousness, trying to just get from point A to point B alive. That I could not film any of this during any of this time. And at this point, I had known I should have been filming for years, even prior to that leak or that spill. So it was just so chaotic and so absurd, it wasn't possible. So that's why I'm doing all of this now. And the other problem is this eventually ended up forcing me from my hotel on October 31st because I could not produce the documents they were asking for, due to my mother telling them Charmaine doesn't, that she's just made up, or I pay her to write false medical documentation, or whatever she was telling them, because that's what it seemed like she was telling them. And at the same time, the private center we'd been treating at, the Oxford Center, was the other place with the majority of our records, because that's where we'd been treating every day for all those years. And now Tamala Peterson, the owner of that center, has been arrested as of last week, and she's being held on a $2 million bond for all these different crimes she's been involved in at the place. And some of them are regarding my situation in different matters of my situation along the way, not just this. But she is responsible for the 5-year-old boy and the hyperbaric chamber explosion as well. And she refused to give me my medical documents and my son's medical documents of everything we needed to submit to Ford. And that was the only way they were going to continue to flush the spill enough for us to return to our home safely. And because she refused to give them to us, I could not produce any records, and I could not travel from point A to point B. And they believed my mother's delusions about Charmaine, that they didn't accept anything anybody was saying. And they were also demanding drug tests for me from Charmaine, and demanding to know what she's diagnosed me with. Now, mind you, Charmaine had watched this for almost 2 years at this point. My condition, slowly recovering every week. Every Sunday I would see her, and she would watch the progress of what these treatments were doing, and how I was slowly able to very slowly regain functioning, very slowly have my brain tissue repaired. And she knew it was a physical condition. This was not a mental, emotional disorder or a drug problem. She knew that. And the lady was refusing to accept anything she was saying about me, and then she's demanding to know all these diagnoses, which was none of her business. And Charmaine flat out told her, that's none of your business, lady. I can't give you any of that information. That's not legal. So due to all of this, all the chaos, crimes, conflict, each person played a role. So you have my mother's crimes are in the mix. Tamala Peterson, the owner of Oxford, it was called Oxford Recovery Center at the time. She's in the mix. Then you have Christine at the top of Ford in the mix. You have Mayor Mark Hammond, the mayor of Flat Rock, in the mix. You have the entire city of Flat Rock in the mix, anybody who worked there, and you got the Flat Rock Police Department in the mix. All of these people played a role in making sure my hotel got cut off. So then we were forced home to live in the gas particles, and the higher up they are, They go higher up. So the levels, the upstairs has more higher levels than the downstairs, and the basement has less. However, I couldn't really use my basement because it's not finished, and it needs to be sealed for me to safely be down there, so I could not stay in my basement. But I did have 2 rooms on my main level that were significantly more clear than the rest. Not 100% clear, but significantly more clear than the rest. That is where we remained for months, living on the floor with our brains bleeding, because this particular gas caused our brains to bleed, our inner ears to be itching from it in an extreme manner where they couldn't be itched and there was no relief from it. And it was the blood was dripping out our ears very slowly. So we went through over 1,000 ear candles in the time period we were forced to stay in our home with our brains bleeding, living on the main floor. Now, there was a significant difference of how much air was clear between where the couch was and where the floor was. The floor was clearer than the couch. So in order to get a breath of fresh air, we were literally, our faces were on the carpet, on the floor, trying to get oxygen like this. For months, we lived that way. And my son was in kindergarten doing homeschooling during all this. The very first day of kindergarten was the first day the gas spill had happened, and came out, and here we were running for our lives on the very first day of school. And then I had trouble with the school understanding that we had such an extreme injury from labor and delivery that we were just starting to get to a point where he could be taught when this occurred. And because everybody lives in an illusion, believing if you're really that injured or sick, you would be at a hospital, and nobody along the way of our entire injury at any time during any of these years can comprehend that we've never gotten proper medical treatment within the hospital, and we're never in the hospital. So that was another issue I had with my son's school along the way. And then when we returned home, we were in and out of consciousness with our brains bleeding, trying to get breaths of air, literally with our faces in the carpet, trying to get the freshest breath possible to breathe the cleanest air to keep us alive. And in the meantime, we're having to go in the garage and do tons and tons of ear candles to remove the blood that's dripping from our brains bleeding from the gas and coming out our ears. Here we are trying to remove it, and then we have to pay for treatment, self-pay out of pocket. In order for me to produce any income, I'm having to work at least 3 nights out of the week, and I'm trying really hard, and then I'm having to treat twice a week. My son's having to treat once a week just to remove the overload of what we're taking in, having to live in the home with that many particles going into our system. Our home was never all clear. The area outside and the area in people's homes were cleared to EPA's level of all clear. That is not all clear. That is like 90% clear. We literally had to have 0 where it was before the spill. We literally had to remained in a sterile environment. That was our situation. It had been our situation for years. And they did not want to believe that based on my mother's delusional phone calls to the city and Ford. So we stayed in that very extreme state. And I will get more into the EPA and what they did during this in its own video, because that's its own thing. But prior to returning home, I did have an issue with the EPA, numerous issues with them. And I will go into that in its own video, because they're a fraudulent agency as well. They are not there to protect the environment. They're there to cover up the damage of what's going on and to mitigate the damage, and anybody suing anybody. So they're not there to help protect the planet or the people. So I will get into that in its own video, because I did go through a whole situation with that as well. Now here we are doing kindergarten. Now it's November 2021. Here we are doing kindergarten, stuck on the floor in the one room of our house, because the other clear room is the kitchen. So we have one room to live in and try to breathe in and keep ourselves alive during all of this. And also during this, my daughter was 16 at the time. She was technically kidnapped by my mother during all this, and had stolen my mortgage payment on the way to the bank for me to pay it during that time as well. And due to the ongoing crimes of the Flat Rock Police and my mother, there was a whole other separate incident regarding all that during this time. So I will get into that in those separate videos as well. Now, they did believe my mother had custody of her, and at no time was that ever real. So I'll get into all of that. And the Flat Rock Police believed that I never even had the money in the first place that my daughter stole, based on the delusional phone calls that my mother places to the police department. And the person she's portraying me to be, they believed I would never have that kind of money. So I'll get into that in its own video, but nothing was ever done about any of it, and that created further extreme disaster as well down the line. So we spent that entire year, that entire school year, so November, December, January, February, on the floor, me doing nothing but taking us to treatment and back those couple days, going nowhere but that, going to work 3 times a week and back. If it got extremely bad to where I was just so overloaded in the house, it had to depend on the temperature outside. So if it was, the particles were too heavy and I knew I was near death, I would take myself to work, and my son was a little more healed than I, so he wasn't experiencing it as extreme, but it was still a pretty big problem. I had to take myself up out of here, and I would remove myself and just go to work because I could work whenever I want since I'm self-employed. I removed myself from the area, went back to Ohio, took the chance of driving through the particles, risk losing consciousness driving there and back, and stayed there. And then when I'd get there, because I drove through all the particles, where all these particles didn't just remain in the Flat Rock area, they remained in a 20-30 mile radius for at least a year, and a good 20-mile radius for like a second year as well before it completely dissipated. And I had to drive through the particles to get there. So when I'd get there, I'd be unconscious. Once I'd get to work, I'd fall out and be unconscious when I first got there for quite some time. Then I'd wake up and start to come out of it. My brain would stop bleeding because now I'm in cleaner air. And I would work that little bit, try to make that money and get back home. I still had the lady working for me at that time as well. So she would just come to my house and stay the night. And during this time, she had to go get another job during all this because she was fully working for me during that time. And because of the gas leak and me having to be so far away, she did have to go get a regular job again because she had been working for me for some months at this point. So she did still come back and work for me, but she had a regular job. And when I needed her here, she would just come and sit here and sleep here and then go to her job while we were here. And if I had to run off to work, so she would just stay here with my son, or if I had to go to treatment without him, she would just stay here. So that was still going on. That's how I got through that portion of it. But I knew, I wasn't for sure if I was gonna have to leave the home or not, because they still did just did not clean it up in any type of manner that I needed it. I couldn't travel down the road to get anything without having extreme symptoms and brain bleeding. So it wasn't clear my drive to work. It wasn't clear going to the grocery store. I couldn't do anything. I was living in an extreme state of suffering. Not only was my brain swelling and bleeding, but my whole body was swelling up with the particles I was taking in, and it was loading up. So at one point, my legs were purple from no oxygen getting to my legs and my feet. So that's how we went about things for those few months. Then I had to assess once the weather started to break, because when it got real cold, the particles stay really low in the sewer system. They stay down lower. So at that point, the main floor room was those couple rooms were a little clearer, where we could be on the couch instead of the floor. But once February, I believe it was February 22nd or 21st or 22nd of February the year was 2022. So several months after this gas leak, 4 months after being forced home, there was a fisherman who had found some gasoline floating in the Huron River down the road in Flat Rock, and he called the news about it. And then the mayor, Mark Hammond, is on the news. He had come up with this whole fake story that there's some underground storage tanks from some company who'd owned this building for some decades. It used to be owned by Ford like 60, 70 years ago, had not been owned by Ford in quite some time. And that's who the storage tanks belonged to, but they had not owned them in all these years. It was this other random small company, and that's where it leaked from. That's where it came from. They were getting people out there to clean it up, whatever. That's a complete lie. What that fisherman found in the river was the initial spill from 2021 that they had flushed into all the waterways, the sewer system, and the lakes and the rivers. So that's what that fisherman had found, and I was the only person who knew that, because here I am experiencing continuous symptoms upon any time I have to go anywhere, including to work or down the street, wherever, it didn't matter, in my home, experiencing continuous symptoms the whole time. I can feel where it's heavier, where the particles are more. And ironically, I was actually over right by where where the gas was found in the river. I happened to be at a restaurant over there the night before. And mind you, I had not gone anywhere, done anything, or had any quality of life for years. This was one of the very first times I had gone out or gone anywhere. And I had dinner with someone down the road, And I knew it because I could feel the weather was starting to warm up just that day. And that was the first warm, it wasn't warm, but it was a little bit warmer, just probably in the 30s, upper 30s maybe. So I started having the brain bleeding and more symptoms while I was over there. So when I knew the next day, when the fishermen found it and it was on the news, I knew. And before I was even sent the news clip by my neighbor, I had already known something was wrong. And it was just because the weather broke, and I had messaged him something about, are you feeling okay over there? Do you notice anything? Something along those lines. And he sent me the news clip. And I already knew, and I said, no, that's not true. I said, they never cleaned it up initially. They only cleaned it up 90%. That's what that fisherman found. And it was getting to the point where I was overloading with the gas, thought I might have to drive up out of here and get a hotel in Ohio again. And then I was paying attention to my son's breathing because he's in and out of consciousness. And I was waiting for him to start to have a gas cough or start to pause breathing while sleeping. And if that started happening, I had to have a go bag ready at all times during this. And I'm used to that because I've had to have go bags ready for many years due to my mother's ongoing crimes and the agency she uses to chase me. So I had a go bag ready. Because it gets real hard when you get in that state and something like that's going on, you can't gather your belongings and get out. So I had a bag ready to go in case we did have to go. If his breathing was going to pause, we were out of here. And then ironically, he was on the floor and I was on the couch. And he wanted to be on the floor for whatever reason, whatever he was doing. And for some reason, I got down on the floor with him. I said, you don't have to be on the floor. And for whatever reason, I got down there with him. And that's where I noticed those couple inches were clear on the floor again. Now here we are, 2 inches from the floor, breathing into the carpet, getting the clearest air possible, so all those symptoms would start to be relieved from our brains and our systems. They would clear if we started breathing clear air. So there was the only clear air. I did have an oxygen concentrator in a home hyperbaric chamber at the time. However, with the amount of particles that were still in my home, the gas particles, that concentrator could not be used. It would ruin the concentrator. So I only used it when it became extremely urgent. I didn't use the hyperbaric chamber portion of it. I just used the concentrator for the additional oxygen when we absolutely had to, during that time that we were forced to stay in the home. So now, since that incident happened in February, what happened was right after that guy found all that stuff the very next day, they put the fake story out. Then they put one of the trucks that flush right in front of my neighbor's house. So right next to me, there's a sewer. I saw the truck out my bedroom window flushing it. I already knew something was going on because I went upstairs to shower. This was one of the 2 days a week I was going to treat. Our treatment happened to be, it was like 11 a.m.-ish, I think it was scheduled for. So I went upstairs to shower, and like I said, the higher up, the particles are higher up than lower. But both of my showers are upstairs. I don't have a shower downstairs. I just have a half bath downstairs. So I had to go upstairs to shower, and during that, I was getting choked out of the upstairs portion of my home. So that's when I looked out the window and I saw the truck flushing next door. And so that told me, that just confirmed what I already knew, because why would there be a truck flushing right where the initial spill is? Because my house sits right where the main spill line is. If it truly came from those underground tanks in the river, there wouldn't be a truck next door flushing where my house is. And choking me up out of the house. We literally got choked out of our house. Good thing we were already on our way out the door. This was already scheduled way in advance. So we made our way out the door. I knew exactly what was going on. I got up out of here as quick as I could. I drove north because this is like 42 miles away. So here I am driving north, drive up out of it until we get to a more clear area. We do the treatment. We're clear. I had a friend who stayed in Detroit. I spent the rest of the time there in Detroit, basically till evening, later that evening, past rush hour and everything, because I knew there's going to be heavy particles in the entire area. My home's going to be loaded with them. The whole area is loaded with them. I knew it wasn't safe to come home, so I just didn't come home until way later. But I had to go home at some point, so I came home, and on my drive home, there was 5 cars that caught fire. Once I got closer to home, the several miles out or surrounding my home, because here now that what they did is they went and they flushed the surrounding area because it was remaining from that initial spill where they initially started all the flushing. They did all that while I was gone. And then I saw 5 different cars catch fire on my way back home. And they were just burst into flames out of nowhere and on the side of the freeway due to the amount of gas particles, because when it flushes, the remnants rise up and through the other sewer drains, they come up out of the sewers. That's where it comes from. That's where the particles flow from. That's how, it gets stirred up when the flushing happens and it rises up. So that's why those cars were on fire. Then I returned home. It wasn't completely clear, but we stayed in the clearest room again, and we got down close to the floor. We spent quite a bit of months living on the floor of the one room, just trying to stay alive, because during this, now I know from that day forward, now I knew I was going to have to buy another home and get out of here. I wasn't sure, but I was pretty sure, and I was waiting for the weather to break. So now that happened, even though they flushed again, it still was not all clear. And it definitely was never EPA's level of all clear out there that entire time. From September to, this is end of February now. It wasn't ever EPA's level of all clear either outside. And the way they all check for it, I'll explain that in the EPA video, because that's all false too. So at this point, now I'm knowing I'm going to have to put someone in my home for about a year. It's going to take about another year for these particles to naturally clear with natural precipitation. I'm going to have to leave the home. I was pretty much almost finished with it being remodeled. For me, to stay in long term when this all happened. And that's when I knew I had to start stacking my money and get enough to buy a house with cash, because I'm self-employed and they go by 2 years of employment. I was off for COVID for 16 months. So my income on paper, they're not going to count the COVID pay. And with the mortgage I already have and the credit I already had out, they weren't going to give me another mortgage, and it was life or death. So I had to buy a mobile home with cash. I bought a mobile home with an addition all the way down in the southwest end of Toledo, so away from the waterways, so I could still get to work. Because again, I'm having a problem driving to work all down I-75, where these particles are still coming off of Lake Erie this entire time. So now I know I got to buy this place. I got to put somebody in my home. I got to finish getting it together so it's rentable. I was supposed to turn it into an Airbnb and buy another home anyway. But this was all forced, and it destroyed my plans, and it destroyed everything I was building. Because then I was not able to do that because I could not maintain the Airbnb. I could not travel back and forth. And I needed the support of my dad and the lady who was working for me. And because of my mother repeating delusions to my dad was still working at this time. He wanted to. And I told him, you need to retire. You don't need to work. I will pay you what your job is paying you. Retire. You're already getting Social Security. I'll pay you what your job is paying you. He thought it was a joke, and I was not joking. I was drop dead serious. All I had to do was work another year, and everything would have flowed properly, and I could have paid him, and he could have retired. But because of the delusions my mother pumped him up full of, acting like that's so funny. She's so mentally disordered. She's got all these bright ideas. She's on drugs. She's mentally disordered. No, that was all real. I had already had all this planned in advance. It was just because of the gas that I couldn't do it myself, and I needed both of them on board with me in order to carry out my next set of plans if I wanted it to happen right then and there. Otherwise, if the spill hadn't happened, it still would have happened, and I wouldn't have needed my dad, full time. He should have been retired anyway because of his age, but he listened to her for some reason, not even looking at the reality of the situation, that what he had actually been seeing before his own eyes. And that would have prevented his injury a couple years ago. That would have never happened. He would have never been working at that point. But he believed what my mother was pumping him up full of, telling him all these delusions about me. And she had no knowledge of any of reality because there's been no contact for 20 years. She knows nothing. She knows nothing about how I make my money, what my plans are, what's going on, what I'm building, what's going on. He actually believed her. And then a few months later, he ended up having the injury and walking off the scissor lift at his work. So if he had agreed, I wouldn't have had to put renters in my home. I could have went forward with the Airbnb. I just needed his help, but he would have had to retire, and I would have needed the lady working for me to continue working for me, which would have been okay if they both agreed. But because he was not on board, I could not carry that out. So due to that, I had to put tenants in my home, and I wanted to make sure the payment was guaranteed. So I took her Section 8 voucher, made it Section 8 ready for her to specifically take her voucher, and she knew in advance this was not gonna she was not gonna be in the home longer than 2 years. That was gonna be the maximum amount of time. And that's how I made sure I had the base payment to keep everything going. So that's how I had to go about it. And then in June, I had bought the place that I ended up having to remodel. Me and the lady who worked for me went down there. We remodeled it together. We made it safe for us. And so all during, now I had a safe place for us to go to, even though we didn't have running water for a couple months and I didn't have appliances for about a month. Eventually that all did happen, but the whole house had to be gutted. So I gutted the entire thing. We got it all in working order. I remodeled the whole thing, got it all safe for us, got everything working and everything going. It just took a couple months, but at least I had a safe place for us to breathe air, especially once I got the carpet in. So I had a friend from high school come down there with me. He helped me with the carpet. There was very few people I could trust during this time. So it was just the lady who worked for me, a close friend from high school, and I'll do my own video on the very few people who have helped me along the way of all of this during everything I've been through, because there is less than the amount of people on one hand that I can count who I could truly trust and who ever reached out a hand to help me during any of what I had been through. So I'll do my own video on that and give kind of, kudos to these people, because nobody was helping me. They do deserve a pat on the back for the few people who did help. So at least I had that put together. It took me some time. I was back and forth for a minute, but I did spend quite a bit of time down there getting it together. And I was still working down there. So that way I was not driving through the affected area where the particles were off 75. I was now down south, further south of where I was working, and in a clear area where these particles were not. And then I'd fully moved everything in, a couple months later. It just took me some time to get everything, gutted and then re-put back together, and then I could get my stuff in there. So at that point we had a safer place to be, and I knew it was going to take a whole other year of rain, natural rain and snow to melt away and flush it all away, which that is exactly how it went. It did take an additional year, just like I thought. So it took about 2 years total from the time it spilled to get it clear for me to return to my home. Now, exactly 2 years later, I come back to find my home to have $100,000 in damage and the entire thing flooded from the kitchen all the way downstairs. So that's its own issue. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back and I'm going to talk about what was said on the news. And I'm going to show some of these news clips and the lies that the mayor and what the city was talking about and what they had on TV that was not real. And I will talk about more of that in depth in its own videos. I just wanted to give the baseline out about that initial spill, what had happened during that, and then going forward, what happened after that, because it caused other catastrophic events from there to the current, which are still going on. Because now, like I said, there's a spill going on right now as I'm making this video. So I will be back with another one. I really don't want to go over 30 minutes. I try to keep the videos between 15 and 30. So I'm going to cut that one right here, and I'll be back with more. Thanks. Bye.